Today we'll talk about the top 10 things that were normal in the 60s but have now disappeared or are banned. Number 1. Drinking and driving. Drinking and driving is a big no-no today, right? But if you were around in the 1960s, it was different. Back then, drinking and driving was a normal part of life. Guess what? People would hop into their cars with a can of beer between their legs, raise the volume of music, and drive with the windows down. They caused a scene on the highway. Well, the police were friendly, they only gave them a warning, which was if they stopped them at all. Getting drunk and driving was seen as a silly mistake, not a serious crime. Hardly anyone got in trouble for it. It was a time when life was carefree and wild. Of course, we know better, and laws are stricter to keep everyone safe. But imagine living in a time when the rules were so loose. This shows how much things have changed since the 1960s. Number 2. Littering. Back in the 1960s, littering didn't count as a big deal. It was just part of the routine. We see this play out in an episode of Mad Men, a show set in the 1960s. In one episode, a picnic just ended. One of the guys stands up and throws his beer can off into the woods. Another lady shakes out her picnic blanket, leaving trash everywhere. She then walks away without a care. In the 60s, you could be driving and throwing garbage out of the car window without batting an eye. As time passed, the government realized it was a huge problem, so they got creative. They put up trash cans in public parks with funny write-ups like "Don't be a litter bug" written on them. This helped to re-engineer the minds of future litter bugs. Well, a lot of people still throw stuff on the ground, but if you're caught, you'll get into big trouble. Number 4. No helmets. Did you know that helmets weren't really a thing in the 1960s? Kids rode their bikes without them. The helmets used back then were flimsy half-shells with leather straps that barely provided any protection. Even hockey players didn't bother with helmets. People didn't worry much about head injuries. But as time went on, more and more cyclists ended up in the emergency room with head injuries. It was clear that something needed to change. Today, wearing a helmet while biking is a must. Countries like Australia, New Zealand, Argentina, and Cyprus mandate cyclists to wear a helmet. Even if it weren't mandatory, you'd feel too scared to ride without one. It's amazing to see how people in the 60s lived a carefree life. Number 5. Pets roamed free. If you grew up in the early 60s, you probably saw several neighborhood dogs around and played with them. These friendly pets roam the streets and don't hurt you when you touch them. Owners open their doors each morning and let their dogs wander off for hours. It only returned home to eat or sleep. If it didn't come back early, the owner would stroll around the neighborhood, calling its name. You might even see your dog around a convenience store begging for treats from customers. There were no fancy dog groomers or dentists to care for these dogs. Believe it or not, there were no laws forcing owners to clean up after their pets. This meant that dog poop was a common sight. It was also normal to see two neighborhood dogs fighting in the alley. Owners rarely walked their dogs because they were busy with other things. It was fun to have them roam around, but things have changed since then. Nowadays, letting your dog roam free has serious consequences. Number 6. Your home was dangerous. Asbestos was used in home construction from the 1940s to 1970s. Builders used it because it was strong, cheap, resistant to chemicals, resistant to water, and resistant to electricity. But here is the scary part. Asbestos is one of construction's biggest killers. You can't see it, but it is hidden in hundreds of building products. In fact, thousands of people die from asbestos-related diseases yearly. Symptoms from asbestos used to take years to develop and are slow but painful. Many older adults dying today may have been exposed to it in the 1960s without even knowing it. Even though asbestos is still used today, it is banned or limited in over 50 countries. In the US, the Biden administration has finalized a ban on chrysotile asbestos, and companies must phase it out within the next 12 years. Before we get to the next banned thing, be sure to smash that subscribe button and comment "I subbed" to be entered into our monthly shoutout draw. This week's shoutout giveaway goes to Stu D'Amato. Thanks for being part of the family, and let's keep it going. Number 7. No airport security. Before the 1960s, airport security was super simple. It was nothing but a few civilian police keeping an eye out for common thieves. But then the airports became a target for serious crimes like mass shootings, bombings, and aircraft hijacking. Although the first aircraft hijacking occurred in 1931 in Peru, events like this were rare. Airports were generally safe, but by the late 1960s, more hijackings happened. In 1969 alone, there were 87 hijackings, 71 of which were linked to Cuba. It became obvious that airports needed better security. Today, passengers are screened for weapons and explosives before boarding the plane. Their baggage is also properly screened for explosives. The September 11 attack was a game changer in airport security. We don't expect the standards to go down anytime soon, considering the level of insecurity today. I'll say we miss the good old days when you could walk freely into the airport without all these checks. Number 8. Latch Key Kids. Latch Key Kids were everywhere in the 1960s. These were the Generation X kids who came home to empty houses because their parents were at work. Thanks to higher divorce rates and more moms working, these kids were called day orphans. They would spend hours alone after school. There were no nannies and no babysitters to look after them. Even though they were bored, they had no other choice. It was normal back then to leave kids unsupervised, but not anymore. Today, some states have strict age rules about leaving kids alone. If your child got hurt while you were away, you'd be in big trouble. It is much safer to have a stay-at-home caregiver for your kids than to leave them to their childish fate. Number 9. Milkman. Who remembers the sound of the milk truck or the clink of the bottles? Remember when you would rinse out your bottles in anticipation of milk? Although not necessarily banned, the milkmen have disappeared. They were morning heroes. A milkman would knock on your door in the early morning to deliver fresh milk. He drove a milk truck and it had a distinctive sound. Even if you didn't have a milkman in your neighborhood, you could walk to a nearby farm in the evening at milking time with your clean bottles. You fill them up straight from the cooler. This used to be one of the most exciting things to do in the morning. Unfortunately, we've replaced this with many activities like hitting the gym. No one remembers milkmen and their contributions to society. If you want milk, you buy it from the supermarket in a plastic or cardboard container. People no longer trust a milkman with their milk these days, as there are healthier alternatives. Number 10. Everybody got married. Did you know that in the 60s, 79% of people over 18 were married? Most marriages happen at a young age. It was impossible to be young and unmarried. In fact, if you were single, people assumed that something was wrong with you. The average groom was 23, while the average bride was only 20. While love was a factor, marriage was a source of income for women, those who married wealthy men and lived comfortably. The divorce rate in 1960 was about 22%, but things started to change in the late 60s, and divorce laws were more relaxed, leading to more divorces. Even so, people still get married today, but the average groom isn't 23 anymore. In fact, 23-year-old men are still considered boys. How old were you when you got married? Please share with us in the comments below.